The United States is about to experience one of the most dramatic weather pattern shifts we've seen in decades, as the polar vortex has officially collapsed following a massive stratospheric warming event. Right now, we're seeing the aftermath of Winter Storm Hernando that just dumped up to 2 feet of snow across the Northeast over the weekend. But this is just the beginning of what could be weeks of dangerous weather. The polar vortex collapse is about to unleash a series of Arctic blasts that will bring temperatures 30 degrees below normal from the Great Lakes all the way down to Florida. What makes this situation so unprecedented is that we're not just talking about one cold snap. We're looking at a complete pattern flip that could persist well into March. The stratospheric warming event that caused this polar vortex breakdown is now interfering with atmospheric waves and creating a chaotic weather pattern that meteorologists are calling one of the most significant disruptions to winter weather in modern history. So, in today's forecast, I'm going to break down exactly what this polar vortex collapse means for the United States, how the stratospheric warming event is completely reshaping our weather patterns, and why the next several weeks could bring some of the most extreme winter weather conditions we've seen in a generation. But first, let me explain what just happened to cause this massive shift in our weather patterns. A stratospheric warming event began in mid-February, and this high-energy event heavily destabilized the polar vortex, disrupting the northern circulation that normally keeps Arctic air locked up in the polar regions. When this happens, it's like opening the floodgates for Arctic air to spill southward into the mid-latitudes. The polar vortex is essentially the keeper of cold air. When it's strong and intact, it acts like a fence that keeps the coldest air bottled up around the North Pole. But when it gets disrupted or collapses, which is exactly what we're seeing right now, that cold air can escape and create what we call proper winter weather across the mid-latitudes. The latest high-resolution model data is revealing a complete breakdown of the polar circulation, and this breakdown is forecast to release Arctic air across North America and Europe for potentially weeks to come. What's particularly fascinating about this event is that it's not happening in isolation. The stratospheric warming is colliding with something called the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is a powerful tropical atmospheric wave. This collision is creating atmospheric interference that's complicating the entire late winter outlook for the United States, Canada, and Europe. The MJO consists of two parts, an enhanced rainfall phase and a suppressed rainfall phase. And this wave pattern is now interfering with the normal downward impact of the stratospheric warming. This interference initially shielded parts of the central and eastern United States from the full effects of the stratospheric collapse, which is why we had that brief period of above normal temperatures, even as the polar vortex was breaking apart in the upper atmosphere. But that protective shield is now breaking down, and the connection between the stratosphere and the surface is re-establishing itself. This means we're about to see the full impact of this polar vortex collapse manifest in our surface weather patterns. The latest ensemble forecast models are showing a pressure pattern that's almost exactly what we would expect to see after a stratospheric warming event. We have a blocking high-pressure system developing over the polar regions and Greenland, with a low-pressure area extending from the United States all the way across the Atlantic into Europe. This is a very clear signature of a collapsed polar vortex circulation, and it's setting us up for a prolonged period of below normal temperatures. Looking at the temperature forecast for the coming days and weeks, we're seeing a strong polar air anomaly developing over the central, southern, and eastern United States, reaching all the way down into Florida. This is a significant cold anomaly, with temperatures forecast to reach over 30 degrees Fahrenheit lower than normal for this time of year. This polar air mass is also going to bring additional significant winter storm events, which is typical when you have a polar vortex core that's been displaced southward. The disrupted polar vortex footprint is clearly visible in the pressure anomaly analysis. You can see the low pressure cores over the eastern United States and Europe, with high pressure blocking over the polar regions. This allows for a strong northerly flow that will bring Arctic air masses into the United States and northern Europe. The surface result of this pattern is already becoming evident in current temperature observations across the central and eastern United States. What makes this situation particularly concerning is the timing and the duration. We're now in late February, which is typically when we start to see winter patterns beginning to weaken as we head towards spring. But this polar vortex collapse is essentially hitting the reset button on winter, potentially extending harsh winter conditions well into March and possibly even early April in some areas. The Canadian long-range forecast model has been updated and shows continued cold air support over Western Canada and the northern and central United States, continuing into February and likely beyond. The immediate impacts we're seeing are already significant. Winter Storm Hernando just finished pummeling the Northeast with up to 2 feet of snow and wind gusts exceeding 70 millimeters SIAO. This storm underwent what meteorologists call bombogenesis, or rapid intensification, dropping 24 millibars of pressure in 24 hours as it moved up the coast. The storm created blizzard conditions from New York City up through Boston, with snow falling at rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour and creating whiteout conditions across the densely populated northeastern corridor. But that storm was just the first wave of what's coming. The broad troughing that's now present across the central and eastern United States is going to support multiple additional storm systems over the coming weeks. Shortwave energy embedded within this trough pattern will continue to push low-pressure systems across the east, bringing heavy rain and thunderstorms to parts of the Tennessee and Ohio valleys and the southern and central Appalachians, with the potential for additional winter weather in the northeast. The pattern is also setting up for what could be some severe weather across parts of the south. As these Arctic air masses clash with warmer, more unstable air masses from the Gulf of Mexico, we could see the development of strong to severe thunderstorms, possibly including tornadoes. This is actually not uncommon when you have such dramatic temperature contrasts, and the Storm Prediction Center has already begun highlighting areas of concern for potential severe weather development. Meanwhile, the western United States is experiencing the opposite extreme. Ridging aloft over the southwestern United States is bringing above normal temperatures, with highs potentially reaching into the 90s and potentially breaking records in the desert southwest. This creates an incredible temperature contrast across the country, with some areas seeing temperatures 30 degrees below normal, while others are 20 to 30 degrees above normal. The Winter Storm Severity Index from NOAA is showing extensive coverage of winter weather impacts across the northern and eastern United States. The strongest impacts are expected over the states of Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, with major to extreme impacts predicted over large parts of the Carolinas. This is particularly concerning because these areas don't typically see this level of winter weather impacts, and they're not as well equipped to handle prolonged periods of snow and ice. Looking ahead to the extended forecast period, additional energies moving through the trough pattern should support a strong cold front moving into the northern tier by the weekend, bringing even colder temperatures. This cold front will be particularly significant because it will reinforce the Arctic air mass that's already in place, potentially leading to some of the coldest temperatures of the winter season so far. The lake effect snow machine is also going to be working overtime. With this much cold air moving over the relatively warmer Great Lakes, we could see significant lake effect snow events developing, particularly downwind of Lakes Erie and Ontario. Some areas could see several feet of additional snow on top of what they've already received from the recent storms. What's particularly challenging about this pattern is that it's not just about the cold temperatures, it's about the persistence. Typically, when we get Arctic blasts in late winter, they're relatively short-lived, lasting maybe a few days to a week before milder air returns. But this polar vortex collapse is creating a pattern that could lock in place for weeks, potentially extending harsh winter conditions well beyond what we would normally expect for this time of year. The atmospheric interference from the Madden-Julian Oscillation is not expected to be permanent, and as that interference breaks down, we should see the full connection between the stratosphere and the surface reestablish. This could potentially open the door to new rounds of even colder air in the last third of February and early March. The European ensemble forecast models are already showing this pattern reversal, confirming the transitional nature of the MJO wave interference and suggesting that the most severe impacts from this polar vortex collapse may still be ahead of us. For people living across the affected areas, this means you need to prepare for an extended period of harsh winter weather. Make sure you have adequate heating supplies, emergency food and water, and backup power sources if possible. The combination of heavy snow, ice, and extremely cold temperatures could lead to widespread power outages that could last for days or even weeks in some areas. Travel is going to be particularly hazardous during this period. The combination of snow, ice, and extremely cold temperatures creates dangerous road conditions that can persist for days after storms pass. If you must travel, make sure your vehicle is winter ready with emergency supplies, extra clothing, food, water, and a way to call for help if you become stranded. The agricultural impacts could also be significant, particularly for early spring crops and livestock. The prolonged cold and potential for late-season snow and ice could damage or destroy crops that are beginning to emerge, and livestock will need additional protection from the harsh conditions. This polar vortex collapse is shaping up to be one of the most significant weather events of the winter season, and its impacts could be felt for weeks to come. The combination of the stratospheric warming event, the polar vortex breakdown, and the atmospheric interference from the MJO is creating a perfect storm of conditions for prolonged harsh winter weather across much of the United States. And as always, thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We'll be closely monitoring this developing situation and providing updates as this historic weather pattern continues to evolve. So make sure to click the bell icon so you're notified with the latest updates. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one.